And we begin this hour with breaking news. Unprecedented and even irreversible changes are happening to this planet.
Antarctica has just had its hottest day ever recorded.
Catastrophic fire. The same community that earlier this week set an all-time heat record in this country.
The impact of climate change is already being felt across Britain.
Human-caused climate change.
Climate change is leaving so many with stark choices.
Climate change is now widespread, rapid.
And time is running out for the climate.
To fight climate change.
Climate change.
Climate change.
Climate change.
Climate change. Climate change. Climate change.
Our messaging around climate change has to change because right now it feels very detached, right? Like we are not showing people the linkage between their own lives and the effects of climate change. And so when we continue to talk about the temperatures are going to rise, which of course is true, that alone is not enough. And this is our work at the World Food Programme. We are showing people that this actually has a direct impact on your livelihood, your ability to feed yourself, to feed your family. That is the conversation I think that is often missing and that is urgently needed because we know that nobody can function. You know, food is a basic human right. It is one of the fundamental needs that we have as humanity. You can't function, you can't do anything if you're hungry. We need to hold our decision makers, like we literally need to hold their feet to fire because if we constantly wait for the leaders to convene at the next meeting, the reality is that this is happening now. We need actions for now. And so we have to keep reminding the policymakers, the decision makers, but also the media of the agency of this situation so that we keep the news in the headlines and hopefully something will change. But it's going to require the everyday citizen, people like you and I, continuing the conversation, continuing to advocate for a better world. I'm so inspired to see the amount of youth engagement around climate change, but I'm also not surprised, right? Because at the end of the day, it is their future we are talking about. We have failed the youth, and it's great that they are saying we are not going to wait for you to create the change that we need to see in the world. We are going to create that change ourselves. And that's what gives me hope.
We want clean power. We want climate change. Stop climate change.
This week, we ask young people about COP26. The challenge is on to reach a consensus on actions to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is the equivalent of 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, and net zero emissions by 2050. COP26 is the conference of the parties, the 26th annual meeting of countries signed up to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Once a year, they meet up to discuss how to address the world's climate crisis. So who was there this year in Glasgow? People who hold power, people who lobby them, world leaders, politicians, negotiators, representatives of civil society, business, and international organizations like the World Food Programme, which is very concerned about what climate change means for the world's 811 million hungry people. There were loads of promises and commitments in hand.
We begin with breaking news from the COP26 UN Climate Conference in Glasgow, Scotland.
About 100 countries committing to ending and reversing deforestation.
20 countries also pledged on Thursday to stop public financing for fossil fuel projects abroad by the end of next year.
More than 40 countries signed up to a statement committing to phase out coal power in the next 2 decades.
More than 80 countries have joined to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030.
I'm Elizabeth Nyamayaro, and welcome to Better Food, Better World. Never before have young people mattered more in this conversation. Young people are reading and engaging with climate and policy really in a way that previous generations haven't, and they have good reason to. Without action, their futures are doomed. The forecast is heat waves, it's storms and floods, and experts are calling this potentially one of the greatest global environmental challenges facing humankind. If there was ever a time for change, it is now.
My name is Gernot Laganda. I'm the Chief of Climate and Disaster Risk Reduction at the United Nations World Food Programme.
Gernot Laganda and his team have a huge task ahead, and they've been keeping a close eye on the climate negotiations. I begin by asking him why climate change is wreaking havoc and driving more and more people into hunger and starvation.
In 2019, the progress the world had made in eradicating hunger had been rolled back by a decade, and 2 years later, we now see almost 900 million people who are suffering from chronic or acute food insecurity. And we're essentially back another decade to the status of the early 2000s. We see food system breakdowns happening very, very quickly. And one of the biggest challenges of these food systems is vulnerability to climate change. Climate shocks such as drought, storms, and floods are causing increasing damage to the systems that produce food and that bring it to people's tables. But it is not only those extreme events that have us worried. There are lower level climatic variations and stresses that play a big role, especially for chronic hunger. Those are untimely rainfall, changing onsets and offsets of agricultural seasons, rising salinity in soils and groundwater, shifts in pest infestations and heat stress in crops and livestock. All this is increasing the vulnerability of people. In such a strained environment, chronic hunger can turn into a life-threatening situation very quickly. So maybe let me give you an example of the realities of a smallholder farmer in a country such as Kenya. So you might plant the way you've learned it, but then either you might be confronted with a long dry period that you did not expect. So the first drop of rain falls, but then you have several weeks of no rain at all. Or you feel the first drop of rain, you start planting, and then tomorrow you have like an extremely strong rainfall event that washes all your topsoil away. There are around 500 million smallholder farms on the world that produce bulk of food in developing countries. These farming systems are especially at risk from climate impacts. What has been a once in a 20-year flood 2 decades ago is now likely to turn into a once in every 3 or 5 year event. I think at community level, there is recognition that resilience building is an absolutely essential element of farming. This is also why you see many people move out of farming, because there are so many shocks that make it impossible for them to sustain or to make a living with this livelihood strategy. The biggest global challenges today have no national borders. Some people used to think that they would be immune to global crises that unravel on the other side of the world, but no one is geographically immune to the coronavirus, and no one is geographically immune to the effects of climate change. We have also learned that as a society, we're only as safe as our most vulnerable people. With climate change, we see that in developing countries with people that are food insecure and are on the front lines of a global climate crisis. If we manage to reduce the vulnerabilities and the exposure of the most vulnerable members of our society, then we are very likely to also solve the problem at a much larger global scale. We need to anticipate climate shocks before they happen. We need to focus on climate change adaptation and preparedness for stronger and more frequent climate extremes. Ultimately, you need policies that lock us into a greener, cleaner, more resilient future. It's very similar, I think, with food systems. You need policy that goes into the direction of more productive, cleaner, more resilient food production, but also then awareness raising about the interrelation between food, climate, and resilience.
At COP26, everyone, youth, world leaders, campaigners, have had their own expectations, hoping to make an impact. The question then is, are our youth making the right connections to strategize for the future? Amongst the atmosphere of frenzied tension and the intensity of the conference, I had the chance to sit down with two young leaders to explore what commitments and promises have been made at COP26 with the biggest youth delegation ever and their demands for the leaders.
They need to protect the environment by intervening in schools, raising the youngest generation to understand these challenges and to take it upon themselves. In fact, it should be a lifestyle. Protecting nature and fighting climate change should be a lifestyle.
This is Andrew Tangang, who is a member of the Restless Development's Youth Power Panel. He's highly concerned about the slow progress and that we are not on track and still have a long way to go.
Like never before, we must not relent our efforts. If we were to compare the systems existing for young people to participate now with what existed in 1992, the evolution has been tremendous. So there's no reason for us to falter. We have the energy, we have the intelligence, we are innovative, we have that drive to move, we have the motivation. There's no reason why we should not be motivated more than ever before. We should continue doing what we are doing and doing it right. Rely on our power, on our ability to change the systems, not necessarily the systems at national levels, not necessarily systems in policies, but practical systems. We should continue in those innovative solutions to community problems. If each of us decide to build one community at a time, we will be amazed by the kind of world we'll find in 2030. And by 2030, I must remind the young people, most of these leaders now will not be there to answer those questions. We will be sitting there. We will now become those people coming to make the big speeches. Ask yourself, what is a speech you want to give to the next generation when you get to Agenda 2030? I want to create the next agenda for the next 15 years.
You are there because you felt that for such a long time, the world leaders have not included youth. You finally have a seat at the table. How does that feel like?
We would like their commitments to go far beyond just telling us, okay, we will give this amount of money to tackle climate change. No, we want them to say, okay, there's this percentage that we would like to give young people or to recognize that young people in communities are doing work to fight climate change. Support them. As simple as that. It's not rocket science. I mean, it's just for the organizations to say, okay, fine, this amount of money will give these young people who have brilliant initiatives to counter climate change. Not just coming to praise the young people, clap for them. No. We are going beyond the level of clapping for young people. Yes, you have given them a seat at the table. That's good. You are now including them in the room. But before coming to the room, the young people have been working outside the room. So support their actions outside the room because the real deal is outside the room, not in the room.
So do you think you're winning? Do you think you get what you came for and get your ask?
So to an extent, yes, we are not winning. We are making impressive strides, at least. Of course, with the support of organizations like Restless Development and all other youth-led organizations out there, we're able to put this statement. We are able to carry out research, policy-oriented research that puts us into perspective. I think from that perspective, it's fine. It's good. We are making progress, but we want to do more and we'll ask for more. But before asking for more, we will do more to ask for more.
If you have to nail it down, being at COP26, representing the youth of the world, what has been your biggest highlight?
The fact that young people have actually taken every necessary step to ensure that their voices are heard. And I think that, yes, to some extent, the political leaders are listening, but we will always know states have their positions. But again, we want them to shift the narrative. In as much as you have your positions at that level, let your positions not compromise the innovative initiatives that young people are taking in their communities to counter the effects of climate change. So maintain your position at that level in your policy papers. Support those young people to implement the initiatives you so desire to implement. Again, we would not like them to look at us as leaders of tomorrow. Young people are leaders of today to prepare for a better tomorrow. That should be the key point at the back of their minds. We are way past the era of leaders of tomorrow. No, we are leaders of now to prepare for that tomorrow. Not challenging them though, just asking them to give us the platform to help them, to help ourselves, help our communities, and let the world grow sustainably.
You know, what you're saying is very powerful, because you are saying as young people, we are not trying to replace you, but we are saying, let's find a way that we can all work together, because it's going to take all of us to create the change that is needed. For you and I, it's such a no-brainer, right? That if youth are driving change within their own communities, then greater progress can be made. Why do you think it's so difficult for leaders to sometimes understand this?
Let's look at it from the perspective of the times. Most of our leaders grew up in an era where, well, of course, you understand very well that technology was not as advanced as it is now. Most of our policies were not informed by evidence. You know, we just assume. But the scientific revolution has been enormous, breathtaking. Now everything is governed by research, real evidence. It works or it does not work. There are no two ways to it. So as a result, we find ourselves being governed by a generation of leaders who technically they find it difficult to adapt to it. Young people who are innovative, they think, they take action, they dare. So as a result, automatically there's that slight disconnect. But we are happy that they have created a room for intergenerational dialogue at every level. We are breaking through that, and I think we are going to get there. Our prayer is, given that the young people are preparing themselves, they need to stay focused and follow the scripts, believe in the evidence, and when you have the limited resources to do quality work so that we see the impact, we can communicate it, we can share experiences, and then we move.
Yeah. I mean, one of the key things I take away from you is, actually reminds me, because you're from West Africa, Thomas Sankara once said, we must dare to invent the future. And I think this is what your call to action is. We must dare to invent the future, and we can't invent the future if youth are not included in that conversation, in those actions, in those investments as well.
Absolutely.
Running between meetings and decisions is Marie-Claire Graf, the global focal point of YOUNGO, a youth movement. I could really feel in her voice the urgency at a conference with more than 15,000 people.
I'm doing very great while being quite exhausted from the days at COP, but still full of optimism and hope. We as young people are part of it and really taking part in this leadership, because there is actually some structure given. While the UN is a country-driven process, so only the governments, the countries have the right to take the decisions and have the right to negotiate. We as young people have an official seat to lobby for our points, to do advocacy. We can also do actions, we can do a lot of other things, but basically we are given a seat through the official children and youth constituency of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And this is a long word, but basically it means that young people have the right to intervene in the negotiation and bring their points forward. And this official network is called YOUNGO, stands for Youth NGO. We love a lot of acronyms, but this is an easy one, Youth NGOs. And literally everyone, every single young person under the age of 35 can join YOUNGO and, for example, also be really championing the agriculture-related text, the food system-related texts, as we are following all the different negotiating items. It's very easy. You can find YOUNGO online. You can join it and be part of it. Just wanted to add, in the beginning, it's a very complicated space. It's a very overwhelming space. So take your time, find someone who has been in the space for some while. Don't drop out. We're very happy to support. But it is a space which is not per se made for young people. But we are getting there and we are not giving up.
Yes, I mean, what you're describing reminds me so much of a saying that you might have heard many times. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think it's just remarkable what you're doing, Marie-Claire, mobilizing youth and having that peer support, which I think is going to be critical. But tell me, what progress has been made so far as you close out COP26?
We have been making quite some progress. So negotiation items are getting closed, which is great. But then it's always the question, is it also inclusive? Is it also, like, for example, the youth-related language taken into consideration? And what we have been seeing, that there was a lot of quantity over quality in our point of view. So, for example, language around human rights, about gender inclusivity has been taken out. Also youth inclusivity, which is an absolute no-go for us in the name of making progress. So yes, we are making progress, but the question is, what progress are we making? Is it the climate justice? Is it the social justice which is included? And for us, this is very, very crucial. That's why we still have to fight for many of these items.
When you hear that gender equality is not front and center of this agenda, what's your next step? How are you hoping to rectify what is currently happening and the pushback you're facing?
Yeah, this is literally what we are doing now. We are running from delegation to delegation. So delegation are representatives of the countries, of all the 196 countries. We are running from office to office to kind of lobby our points, because at this stage we are not even allowed to be in the rooms anymore. That's why we need to have countries who are championing our language for us, and we hope that there is enough leadership from these countries to bring the text back in, so we at least see the reference to human rights, gender and youth inclusion, despite not where we wanted it to be, but it's better than nothing. We are literally going around the countries to try to bring our points across, and we see many countries are receptive, but because it's a consensus process, all the 196 countries need to agree. And if there is one country who doesn't like the human rights or the gender inclusion or youth inclusion, then it's out again. So that's why we have to build a very strong network of supporters.
What are some of the sort of absurd rationale you have heard when people are trying to push back against what are really fundamental rights, right? What are they saying? What is their argument?
Well, you wouldn't believe, but when you're coming to the negotiators with some pretty technical language, and then they're saying like, oh no, young people don't understand this. Young people are not capable of the technicalities. And I'm like, what? I just told you right now what I want to see, and it's pretty technical. So there is a lot of prejudices against young people, which is very often unjustified, and it's very, very unfair, because we have so many young people. In fact, we have the biggest ever youth delegation at this COP. We have so many young people who are absolutely brilliant when it comes to climate negotiation, when it comes to food-related negotiations, when it comes to any other negotiations. And instead of using us as a source, when they're using us as a support and an ally for the ambitions we need, we basically get the pushback that because we are young and we are not experienced, we cannot contribute. It's actually really hard to take in, especially because we are working here on a volunteer capacity, trying to push so hard for our points. And it really hurts when people do not even listen to us and do not trust us. But on the other hand, we also see a lot of people who listen to us, and this is also great to see. But yeah, it's challenging. All the actions are not happening in these premises here. It's not happening in here in the venue, but it's actually happening outside. And I think it's very important to translate what is going on in this venue here to the real actions outside. I think there is still too little done, especially on the national and the subnational levels, to reach out, for example, to the farmers who live on the front line, who are the first ones who are impacted by the climate crisis directly on their businesses, but also the ones who actually have an amazing solution at hand with the farming. And I think that we have to do a better job to reach out to the individuals who are at the end the ones who are implementing the actions. There is still too little of this translation. But at the end of the day, it's about the system we are all in, and we have to change the system. And that's also why I'm so passionate about the food system, because we have to change our broken food system and our relation to food to be able to championing what we're doing here.
Let's talk to Gernot Laganda again, and how at the end of the day, as Marie-Claire says, it's all about the system.
So you cannot only tweak one stage of the chain and then have climate resilience throughout the system. You need to work on all the stages equally. So from production to processing, storage, transport, consumption, those are all aspects where you can introduce resilient characteristics. And overall, resilient systems have a strong asset base, which allows them to buffer shocks and nasty surprises. They have a certain degree of diversity. That means if you are farming only one crop and then you have extremely high temperatures that wipe out your harvest, then you have no options left. And so a diversified farming system is generally more resilient than intensive farming system. If you're farming only one crop, then basically you rely on consistent access to markets, you rely on consistent demand, you rely on the market prices. And especially when there are growing uncertainties in the climate system, or also in the economic system for that matter, it leaves you more exposed than a farming household that is farming different types of crops and has always a fallback position in case one crop fails. Resilient systems are equal and inclusive. So they need to be embedded in an institutional environment which allows fair access and entitlement to key assets along the chain and which does not distribute risk in a biased or imbalanced way. So those are, I think, a number of characteristics that need to be analyzed and that need to be tackled if we want to really build resilient food systems in a changing climate.
Build back better, blah, blah, blah. Green economy, blah, blah, blah. Net zero by 2050, blah, blah, blah.
That's climate activist Greta Thunberg's lambasting of global leaders over their promises to address the climate emergency.
They invite cherry-picked young people to meetings like this to pretend that they are listening to us. But they are not. They are clearly not listening to us.
Marie-Claire, is this the case?
What we see is there has been an unprecedented amount of pledges and declarations and many other things happening while we're at the negotiations. The thing is that it's very hard to hold our leaders accountable to fluffy pledges, to the blah, 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 right? Where we have actually a Paris Agreement. We know what to deliver. We have the 100 billion. We have the support for food systems. We have the science. We have everything what is needed. And there we are stuck. And then interestingly, the countries have been rather moving in the direction of having more and more pledges, which makes it very hard for us to hold them accountable and really look closely what they are doing. So yes, there has been a lot of blah, blah, blah in certain areas. Nevertheless, I wouldn't dismiss also some countries, especially from the small island developing nations, from most affected areas, how they are championing the agenda. And there is a lot of will as well, but we need way more ambition, way more drive, and really moving into the actions. And it was said already like so many years ago, but time is run out. We don't have time anymore to waste.
Andrew, do you think that the conversations from the leaders at COP26 are just blah, blah, blah?
The blah, blah, blah is part of the conversation. We need the blah, blah, blah. So some leaders in the course of the blah, 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 they might make very nice commitments. So they should come with the blah, blah, blah. We'll hold them down on the blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so in essence, there's a lot of talk, yes. Of course, it's going to be followed by a lot of action as well. So I am confident that while the leaders have come to make their statements, young people have come there not just to make a statement, but to showcase their action. So I will still stick to my words. We are not relying a lot on the world leaders because they will talk. We are relying on the power of young people to make the change in their respective communities. And that is why we are representing that missing majority, because it is that missing majority that is moving the world slowly and surely.
My wish this week for Better Food, Better World is that youth are empowered to lead and inform change in their own communities. And I'm curious to know what our guests have to say. So, Andrew and Marie-Claire, what are your wishes for a Better Food, Better World?
My wish is to see a world in which the level of interdependence is quite high and where we all learn to make good use of our resources in all the countries, which means, so we understand that all countries do not have the same level of development. So once we have strengths and weaknesses, we all do have strengths and weaknesses. So we should be able to make good use of our resources to feed the entire population. No child should go to bed hungry. No family should go to bed hungry because the world has enough to eat, to feed themselves, go to bed, and even feed nature. So while feeding ourselves, we should feed nature because it's by feeding nature that we'll feed ourselves again.
Food systems, or our current broken food system, is the major contributor to the climate crisis. But it's a win-win-win solution, literally for everyone, for the planet, for the climate, and for the people. But we have to transform our food systems. Do not be afraid of speaking up, and especially also making these interlinkages between food systems, nutrition, as well as the climate, because the climate got a lot of attention. And I think that the food system, not only here at the COP, but also in general, is still a little bit outside of the discussion. And I think it's very central for us and everyone who knows about it to really bring the food system at the heart of the climate and biodiversity negotiation. I earlier was moderating an event where I was saying it's a bit a cow in the room. No one likes to address it, but it's there, and it's so so important to address it. And I really hope that together, collectively, we can bring the food systems into the center of attention and really transform it in the right direction. And I really hope that we have the courage to lead on this food systems transformation, because we have all the tools needed, we have the people, we have everything at hand, and now we have to do it. And my wish would be that we have the courage and the leadership to do so.
This has been such an incredibly moving experience for me, seeing the youth activism at COP26. And I think Marie-Claire did a good job reminding us that the youth of today have the courage to lead. And I think we just have to recognize that. We have to empower them and give them the space and the resources to do the thing that they're determined and excited to do anyway. And it's going to be a win-win for all of us, right? We are all part of this world. And the impacts of climate change aren't just going to impact the planet, but they are going to impact our humanity. So at the very least, if we don't care about anything else, we surely have to care about saving our humanity. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time on Better Food, Better World. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, please do follow us using the hashtag Better Food, Better World.